Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of 123 CMMC. My name is Dana, and I will be your host. And today is our guest, Christoph. Hello, Christoph. How are you?
Howdy, Dana. I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. Why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself to everybody here?
Sure. My name is Christoph Mlinarchik. I own Christoph LLC, and I help government contractors and subcontractors. I used to be a contracting officer for a bunch of different federal agencies. I also did a rotation as a JAG acquisitions attorney doing government contracts law. I worked for a defense contractor as their director of government contracts, essentially. And I've also supported a few different federal agencies as their government contracts expert. But now what I do is consulting for small and medium businesses, and I do professional instruction. And I also serve as an expert witness in government contracting issues. And of course, I wrote some books. And so I wrote Government Contracts in Plain English, Federal Acquisition Regulation in Plain English, and the latest one is Government Contracts Negotiation Simplified.
So you know about government contracts, that's for sure. So here is my copy of the book, right?
Oh, excellent. Yes.
Yes.
You got that. Yes.
Yes. So if anybody needs help with contracts, this is a good place to start. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about government contracts in plain English because they can get a little bit complicated. So our first question is the shocking truth. Does the Federal Acquisition Regulation apply to federal contracts?
Whoa. Okay. All right. Listen, is everybody sitting down? I hope you're sitting down in a safe place right now because I'm going to tell you something, and that is no. The FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, is people call it the Bible of government contracts because this is the most important regulation for government contracts and even for subcontractors because a lot of these FAR clauses are what's going to be in your government contract. And I'm saying, no, it does not apply to federal contractors. And that's because if you do the research and you read the FAR, you'll find that the FAR itself is written for the government contracting officer and the members of the acquisition team. So the FAR's applicability officially within the document itself shows that it's actually directions for the contracting officer, and it tells the contracting officer how to make deals for the government. So the FAR does not apply to you, and why do we care? Why do we care? We care because the only way the FAR can really touch you and affect you as a business is if a particular FAR clause is in your contract, right? So a little piece of the FAR might apply to you if you can find that little piece of the FAR referenced, whether directly or indirectly, in your contract. And Dana, the bottom line why I stress this point so much, this is why. You, as a contractor, as a subcontractor, you have to be careful because sometimes somebody is going to try to bowl you over or bluff and kind of trick you and say, oh, I need you to do X, Y, Z. And you think, wait a minute, I don't want to do that. That doesn't sound like something I have to do in my contract. And they hit you with a FAR citation and you think, oh, it came from the contracting officer. It's an official FAR citation. I must have to do it. Well, if you remember what I told you, that the FAR is direction to the government, not to you, you'll remember that what's in your contract matters, and you'll probably return to them and say, okay, well, that's a good FAR citation, but can you show me where that's in my contract or my subcontract?
Wow, that's really good. And these I'm sure are very, very complicated and very intimidating in some of the language. And I think sometimes people are just happy to get the contract. So they're really not digging into the details of what's exactly in there. So you
Yes.
have hit on a very, very good point that you really need to make sure that you understand what is in there and understand that if someone does say something like that to you, that it may not be applicable to you. So that was very, very, very handy. All right, so here we go. Fact from fiction. What are the sources of authority or references or citations we should care about?
So great question. This is important because in government contracting, unfortunately, there's a lot of rumors, a lot of myths, a lot of misconceptions where it's basically hearsay or somebody's opinion. And you say, oh, I thought we had to do it this way. Why? Oh, because, Fred Fred said so. Fred told me that we have to do it that way, or a better one. Well, we've been doing it for 10 years this way. It must be the right way. Let's clear that up. I can put it all into 4 sources of authority, 4 buckets. You got laws, regulations, policy, and court decisions. Within those 4 families, that's where you will find official citations or references that people in the know will actually pay attention to. These are things that can affect you. So let's go through some examples. A law, back to 8th grade civics class, right? A law is passed by Congress. A good example, every year, if you're in government contracts, you're checking out that National Defense Authorization Act, right? A law passed by Congress that gives you a lot of hints about what the government's going to do, where the government will be spending money. Let's talk about a regulation. The best example is the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Now, there are many different regulations, but in government contracts, you're going to pay a lot of attention to the FAR, or the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Court decisions, pretty obvious, right? A decision coming out of a court, and I'm going to also lump in the GAO, the General Accountability Office, because that's where you also see bid protests about government contracts. But court decisions are important. Something we've seen in the news that affects government contractors, well, there was a vaccine mandate imposed on federal contractors for a little while, but right now, as we speak, no longer. Why? Because it's frozen. It's temporarily frozen across the entire nation by a federal judge. So, hey, court decisions do matter. And then the 4th category, that would be policy. Policy is pretty difficult. Policy is a bit of a wild card, but I would define policy as something in writing from a valid official in a federal executive agency. A good example of where do these policy memos come from? There's something called Office of Federal Procurement Policy, and they write contracting policy for all the federal agencies. And if you do a lot of defense contracts, you're going to probably be tracking some policy memos from Defense Pricing and Contracting, or DPC, which used to be called Defense Procurement and Acquisition Policy, or DPAP. So the joke we have is we call DPC the artist formerly known as DPAP, right? But to bring it all home, if it's not a law, if it's not a regulation, if it's not a written policy, and if it's not a court decision, you really need to think hard, and you got to say, now, wait a minute, is this an official source of authority, or is this just kind of rumors, innuendo, and hearsay, right? So focusing on that and understanding those as the 4 families of valid authority is going to get you very far in government contracting, and pardon the pun.
That was a great way to break that down. So that's because it's very overwhelming. And then, like you said, the folklore of, what somebody said 5 years ago is just what we've been, going on. That's with every industry that happens, and with everything. So that's great. Point out those 4 things. So thank you for that.
Yes.
All right. How do we get from a law to an enforceable clause in your government contract? This is a good thing to cover.
So this gets complicated. Good news, I'm going to make it simple for you. I will take you right down the road. So let's just start, and let's say that Congress has passed a law that says government contractors have to fill out and submit this form about something, okay? So new law, Congress, our legislature, they created the law, and then you think, well, wait a minute. How are we going to affect the government contractors? Well, it's right in the name, isn't it? We got to get something into their contract. And the way we do that usually is after Congress passes a law, that prompts the executive branch, the federal agencies, to begin their rulemaking procedure, or their making regulations procedure. Some call it promulgating. So after the law is passed, we move over to the executive branch. The executive branch starts to make new regulations. And if we're talking about government contracts, they're probably going to be changing that FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation, and they're probably going to be creating a new FAR clause. So laws passed, they change the FAR, maybe they add a new clause, maybe they change an existing FAR clause. But remember, we're not done yet, are we, Dana? Because we went over the fact that the FAR does not apply to contractors. To touch the contractors, we need to have that FAR clause in the contract. So to bring it all home, the law's passed, the FAR has changed, there's a new FAR clause. Well, we have to get that FAR clause into your contract or your subcontract. Otherwise, it's just a FAR clause out there waiting for maybe the next contract that you get, and not necessarily the existing contract you're performing right now.
Soundway Consulting has been helping the U.S. government and its business partners address today's most complex cyber challenges for over a decade. Soundway Consulting is a CMMC C3PAO candidate. Let them be your expert guide to CMMC compliance. They will provide a clear path to implementing cybersecurity processes and practices. They have a proven track record, and they warranty their work. Visit soundwayconsulting.com or call their office today.
All right, well, this is perfect because this brings us into our next question here. So changes to a contract. Can the government change the terms of the contract you negotiated 2 years ago by just adding an entirely new clause into the contract?
This is a great question and a great opportunity to explain something that is going to help your company from getting tricked or ripped off or signing a bad deal. The answer generally is no. No. If you're talking about adding an entirely new FAR clause or even changing an existing FAR clause in your contract, the answer generally is no. The government cannot just do that unilaterally on their own. They have to get your agreement. It has to be a bilateral or two-signature agreement and change to the contract. Now, the important part of this that people forget is not only does the company have to agree to this modification to the contract, what you should be negotiating is what's called consideration. And you say, consideration? That sounds fancy. What is that? When you hear the word consideration and you're talking about contracts, think money. Consideration is usually money. It might be a schedule extension. It might be something else like that of value, but usually it's going to be money. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you signed that contract 2 years ago and it has a certain number of FAR clauses in there, but then there's this new FAR clause and the government does not want to wait for the next contract. They want to jam it right into your existing contract because they're so excited about it. Well, they can't just do that. Again, they have to, you have to give your permission. They can't just add a contract out of the blue. And so you're going to say, well, this new FAR clause that you're asking to include in the contract, that's going to cause my company extra time, extra money. So I need to be compensated for that. Ding, this is where the consideration comes in. So the savvy contractor will say, okay, you're asking to put in a new FAR clause. That changes the deal. That changes the terms of the contract. We negotiated at $5 million for the old deal. We have a new deal that now changed things and makes me put in extra effort. Every month I have to submit this new form. That costs money, that costs time. So I need more money. So you might negotiate, now the contract is worth, say, I don't know, $5.25 million or something. But the point of this, the bottom line is, no, the government cannot just unilaterally change all the clauses in your contract. No, they don't automatically update when the new version of the FAR clause comes out. That doesn't just automatically change your contract. You signed a contract on that date that had those clauses as they stand on that date. That was part of the negotiation for the specific amount of money and everything else that you negotiated. So if you change any of that, remember to try to get your consideration, which generally is going to be money. Maybe it's a schedule extension or something, but get something of value because the government's getting something of value when they get that new clause in your contract.
That's an excellent point. So if they do want to make changes, keep thinking of the word consideration and ask for some additional funds or whatever you think this is going to cost or anything like that. But that's very good because some people might not think, well, this is an opportunity for me to then say, well, wait a minute, if you want me to do this, then I need to be compensated for doing that. So
the deal changed. That's the point, right? The headline, the deal has changed. So let's make sure something changes on my end to make up for that, right?
This is why this is also very important to make sure you have somebody helping you, or if you need to make sure that you're really aware of your contracts and all these negotiation tactics. So maybe they should buy the green book. They should buy the government contractor negotiation simplified.
Sure. Yes.
All right. So what about subcontracts?
So subcontracts add an additional buffer, an additional layer of detail to this, right? Because so far we've been going over, how does Congress make a law and then executive agencies make a regulation that becomes a FAR clause, and how does a contracting officer change the FAR clause into your contract, right? Well, that's the prime contract that we've been discussing. And then you say, well, what about the subcontract? Well, now you add in the detail of the prime contractor dealing with you, the subcontractor. Many of these same principles apply. Just as with the prime contractor in the government, when you're the sub dealing with the prime, if the prime has to flow down, that's a term of art where the prime contractor flows down and gives you, the subcontractor, the same or similar FAR clause that they have to deal with, right? So if the prime has to flow down that FAR clause to you, the subcontractor, you need to negotiate that as well. You need to remember that as a subcontractor, you signed a subcontract 2 years ago on a specific deal for a specific amount of money. And if the prime comes to you and says, I need to change the deal, I need to add 5 new clauses that create a significant, amount of more work for you. Well, again, magic word consideration. You as the savvy subcontractor, you need to think the deal has changed. This is going to cost me more time and money. Therefore, I deserve more time and money. I need to negotiate in good faith to get that consideration so that I'm not just working for free or something.
Mm-hmm. All right. So subcontractors need to pay attention to this too. Very, very good.
Yeah.
Okay. So our last question, how can contractors protect themselves from getting tricked with new clauses and unfair contract changes?
Well, you got to have an expert at your company to help you with this stuff. If you're not that person, if you don't have that person, find somebody. I mean, I would consider myself somebody who's out there making sure contractors and subcontractors don't get tricked and don't get ripped off. I help them with these issues all the time. I can help you. But even if you don't hire me, I'm telling you, hire somebody. Mm-hmm. You need a pro on your side to help you with these issues. And let me give you a good example of where you might get tricked. Everybody's heard of the option exercise. Many government contracts are punctuated in 5-year intervals, right? You get that base year for 1 year, and then there's 4 option periods of a year each. So a 5-year contract. Well, here's where people get tricked. When the government's exercising one of those option periods, the government sometimes tries something that is inappropriate. And your prime contractor might try this on you when you're a subcontractor also. They'll say, oh, congratulations, Dana. We're exercising, your option for the 2nd year of the contract. And you think, oh, this is great. This is great. More money, more revenue, another year of performance. And they say, oh, but don't worry. We're just sliding in these 5 extra new FAR clauses or changes to these FAR clauses. And it's kind of like a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, right? Mm. No. Don't fall for that. Remember what we've been talking about. If the government tries to exercise your option and combines that with a change to the deal, as in adding a new FAR clause, you can actually walk away from that. You can actually say, no, I don't want to take that FAR clause, or you can negotiate for, remember, consideration, more money for the more time and effort to perform that FAR clause. The point I'm making is when you exercise an option, it's called a unilateral right. It means this is what an option is. It means one party has the unilateral on their own decision right to force you to keep performing. Why? Because you already agreed. When you signed that 5-year contract, you said, I agree, Dana, that I'll perform the 1st year. And if you send me the option exercise on time, I will perform the 2nd year. And if you send me the option exercise for the 3rd year on time, I will perform. So you've already agreed to the option exercises and the option periods, but you did not agree back then about that new FAR clause, right? That's the trick. That's where they get you. That's where you don't realize that. You got to remember, if they try to change the deal in an option exercise, they are revoking or losing their ability to unilaterally exercise that option because they have changed the terms of that option that you negotiated a while back. This is just one of the many pitfalls you can find yourself in. But again, I think the bottom line is you need a government contracts expert on your team. If that's not you, if you don't have one, you need to go get one.
Yep, that's for sure. And I always say nothing is ever a big deal until something happens. And that would be something.
I have a lot of clients, Dana, where they come to me and they already have the problem. And this is where Christoph wishes he had his time machine and he could just jump in and go back 3 years when they did something or failed to do something. And I could have said and whispered in their ear, oh my gosh, don't do that. Here's why, go the other way. So a lot of people, cybersecurity professionals are going to tell you the same thing. Attorneys will tell you the same thing. They always think ounce of prevention, pound of cure, right? The faster you start on something, the more likely you can avoid big problems in the future. This is a maxim we've all heard for a reason. It's because it's generally true in so many situations, government contracts included.
Yep. Well, this was very, very, very helpful. You did an excellent job of breaking this down into language that people can understand. And you brought up some excellent, excellent points. So thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, Dana. This has been my pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Good. Well, we hope to have you back on. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And we hope to see you on the next episode of 123 CMMC. Bye-bye for now.
Yeah.